Hey, everybody, welcome back to our series with gender diverse people working in faith groups. I'm so excited to be here with my friend Myles Markham. Myles is, we're doing some amazing stuff. Myles is in seminary, right? Or is it divinity school?
It's seminary.
Sweet. Myles is in seminary. Myles also works with an organization called the Reformation Project. And we're just here to chat and talk about all of that and what's going on with you. So, Myles, would you introduce yourself with, I've just said your name, but your name, your pronouns, anything that you want to share about how you identify?
Sure. Um, my name is Myles Markham. I use he, him, or they, them. And in terms of ethnic identity, am multiracial, Native Hawaiian,
Mm,
Japanese American, Swedish, German, and Irish.
nice.
And a lot of my journey in uncovering uh, gender for myself was rooted in me being able to connect back particularly to my Hawaiian lineage. And so in terms of identity, the word mahu is a Kanaka Maoli word that just means middle
Mm,
and has per tradition been an identity ascribed to people who embodied uh, what indigenous Hawaiian people would say is masculinity and femininity, and kind of functioned in a story keeper or religious spiritual leader capacity. I guess similar to that would be non-binary, but for the sake of conversation, just using transgender really works for me. Transmasculine, beyond or within all of that, it still matters a lot to me to identify also as a Christian
mm.
and to be able to center, that dimension of my identity.
Would you tell us like a little bit about how you sort of came to understand your gender and your faith and that part of your ancestry and how they sort of like, are there stories about how that sort of came about for you?
So I was raised in Florida, and I was raised in North Florida, which is more conservative politically and religiously.
Mm,
And so even though both of my parents kind of brought, to their growing family a kind of intercultural faith identity, we were in schools and social networks that were pretty conservative, um, evangelical Christian,
mm,
you know, and so because of that, um, I felt like in terms of gender, um, my primary like role models being like both my parents were still very different from like the broader like culture around
mm,
me. Where we were living for most of my childhood was mostly white, um, and there were some like black populations too. So still this like kind of rigid racial like an ethnic binary. And so I'm seeing that and knowing I don't really fit that binary.
mm,
And I'm looking at my mom and looking at my dad. I have a brother and a sister too. Looking at them and seeing how they express gender. I'm in school and I'm looking around and seeing how gender is expressed around me, and knowing, as early as kindergarten, like, that I don't fit really neatly into any of these categories that are available to me.
mm,
Toward like the latter half of my high school experience, I fell in puppy love for the first time. She was a girl,
mm,
and that's how other people thought about me.
mm,
And so I spent the next 7 years in reparative therapy online groups. I went to Bible college, and was a part of an ex-gay ministry
Hmm.
while like in school. And it's really interesting because in those groups, depending on like who's facilitating, you often are actually talking about gender.
Hmm.
You're not talking about sexuality.
Mhm.
And so it was in those groups that I was being encouraged to um, find like my like God, given sense of gender,
Mhm.
which of course like was feminine, you
Mhm.
know, and there was this big conversation about biblical femininity,
Mhm.
and I spent some time trying, to really dive into that. But the things that they prescribe, in that exploration, again, like have nothing to do with orientation and have everything to do with gender expression, gender performance, and sometimes gender identity.
Mhm.
And so that was like the first time I was like, oh, maybe something else is going on here than I thought. I just had such a hard time, like over the last couple years, with trying to figure out the relationship between Christianity and my ethnicities, um, because of the colonial ways like Christianity was introduced to Hawaii. And it just made things hard for me because I thought like, oh, is like transgender like a white thing?
Mhm.
Did it come like from colonialism? And if it did, what is my responsibility to like resisting that?
Mhm.
2014, there was a successful like documentary called Kumahina,
Mhm.
and it followed the life journey and the work like of a mahu person in Hawaii. And when I was watching that film, it was the first time I felt like all of my worlds were colliding.
You saw that documentary about somebody who like had a background that was more similar to yours, that like freed you up to think about how this could actually be for you and not having to use sort of a template from a culture that isn't yours. And it just speaks to the importance of like of visibility and being able to see people that are like you going through things, not just like we talk about visibility when it comes to gender a lot, but we don't talk about it when it comes to gender and ethnicity at the same
Right.
time as much. And so I
Yeah.
just think that that's really, really cool.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The first time I came out, I mentioned like I lost my church, I lost a lot of my friends, my family had a hard time with it, and I did not want to go through that again.
Mm.
And I was sort of like taking that experience and assuming, oh, this is just gonna happen all over again. I don't want to do this. But surprisingly, I think the community I've found myself in Atlanta just did me better.
Tell me, is there something that was like especially helpful to you, like a spiritual practice or maybe a part of a sacred text or something that you found really affirming and supportive that sort of like helped you on your journey?
I love like Christian worship music, and it's contested. Most of my friends disapprove of this affinity in my life, but music has always been the way I first and foremost connected to God. And I'm not a musician, but like I don't know, maybe there's just like something about it that helped me to like access like those emotions and those feelings in my body that otherwise like were difficult for me. And so because of that, I've always just like loved loud like worship and praise music, and having experiences like that in both like a corporate way, at events and like church services, but also just in my car, and in my room. And when I had that experience of, coming out like as queer, like 6 years ago, losing, my church and my friends and all of those things, I went through like this season where I felt like, you know, church was taken away from me, like Christian community was taken away from me, ministry was taken away, from all these things like were people took away, but like music and the Bible, like were not theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore they could not take it.
Mm-hmm.
And so to this day, I still find, my sense of self and particularly like my spirituality, like grounded, both like in the text and in these like music experiences, of praise and worship. So,
All right, last question. What is your favorite thing that the Reformation Project does?
wow.
I gotta have you pick one.
Yeah. So we have.
Well, actually, let me back up. What is the Reformation Project? And then what is your favorite thing that they do?
Okay. The Reformation Project is a Christian nonprofit that is seeking to reform church teaching on sexual orientation and gender identity in order to create a global church that is able to completely affirm and include LGBTQ plus people in all areas of Christian life.
Sweet.
So that's the big picture goal. And we have a handful of programs to try and achieve that end. And it's everything from video content to written resources to trainings, workshops, an annual conference. But my favorite thing we do is something we call the Leadership Development Cohort. And historically, it's happened once a year. And it's been like a 3-month long program where for the most part of that, it's online and people apply. We select 35. Our participants read in sort of like 3 subject areas. One is Bible and theology, understanding the biblical case for LGBTQ inclusion and how that's sort of been situated in Christian history. The second part of that is introducing people to Kimberly Crenshaw's concept of intersectionality and thinking, through the unique ways in which identities, especially ones that are marginalized, often don't just happen in one way, but they happen in multiple ways. And the third part of that program is introducing our participants to community organizing as a discipline. That's my favorite thing because I feel like it is the most like comprehensive and substantive way to really try to push for change.
Thank you, Myles, so much for sharing like your stories, your wisdom, your experiences. I'm really glad that we got to talk. And for folks that are watching, if you have more questions about any of the stuff that Myles has talked about here, and you want to email me and I can forward stuff on, or if you want to talk to me, feel free to email me. It's ahartkey@genderspectrum.org, and we'll have that information down below as well. And then Myles, I'm going to put a link to the Reformation Project. Is there any link for you that you'd like me to put down below as well?
Through reformationproject.org, you can find me.
Perfect. All right. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody.